under kind of looking at some of the major projects and the socio-economic benefit to the state of doing certain projects, which may struggle under just a pure financial CBA, if you know what I mean. So there's kind of a funding gap there that can be looked at, which is important, I think.
Do you think the 2013 policy achieved its objectives?
I think by and large it has. If you look at the big ones, it certainly has. I think Shannon Fine Sport Company, if you were to do an analysis across, certainly has, is a much stronger board now than it was back when the policy was launched. I think, the transfer to the local authorities of some of the smaller ports has happened. The governance, a lot of the governance, requirements have been implemented. So I think, if you're to review it, the policy has been successful and will stand up to, an evaluation on what it was trying to achieve. I think it has been a good policy, and it's definitely set to see port business, and that's what people need to, I suppose, understand. It's a long-term business. It's not short or medium-term. Most of our assets, for example, have useful lives of 50 years plus, lead in times of 7 to 10 years, as indeed internet connectivity infrastructure. So the port business is a long-term play, if you like, and that's, you need to look at it in the long term. So I think from, if you look at 2021 compared to 2013, is the port sector in Ireland stronger than it was back then? I would say it is, and it's more focused on what it needs to do. And it's if you look at things like the National Planning Framework and the Development Plan, for example, they've all taken the lead from National Ports Policy, which again, that's my point. The ports policy has helped focus national policy around ports, which has been very, very important, because that was lacking up to this ports policy.
Okay.
So you look at that. You look at the climate action, that this country will need to the actions this country is going to need to implement. Ports and giving your relationship with offshore energy are going to be instrumental. And again, I think the ports policy, so the fact that we have a clear ports policy that gives guidance is hugely important. And that there really isn't one for everybody in the audience. There can't be, because ports by their nature are such big physical assets. That policy has influenced so many important upstream and downstream policies, if you like, from, at national level, regional, local level. So from that, to my mind, it's been a huge success. We see it.
What would you think is its greatest success, Pat? What would you, if you were to pick one thing out of, what do you think was the biggest success it had?
I think it's that. I think it's that clear structure it introduced, and it kind of made clear what the national and with regards to ports, and it made clear what ports it expected to deliver those national objectives. But it also recognised that the ports couldn't operate on their own, and I think it's hugely important. I suppose one of the areas there was, the capacity study has been, which was called out as something that would be done in the last, and I know, look, obviously with Brexit, COVID, all of these things, that it would be done, but that's an important study that this policy called out to be done, and it's not complete. So, if you want to be really critical there, that's an area that it hasn't delivered on.
Yeah.
But, we all know that's in train, and we know the reasons why it had. But I think it's important that capacity study is completed as quickly as possible, because, it does, and just to give you, for example, we've just gone through an oral hearing here for the Limerick Defined Road Scheme, which was actually promoted in the 2013 ports policy. The ports policy was extremely helpful to us and to An Bord Pleanála. Now, they haven't made a decision yet, but the oral hearing has just completed. But there is no doubt in my mind that without that ports policy, An Bord Pleanála would probably find it very difficult evaluate. Because what we're saying is, look, we're a tier 1 port. We're about providing national ports policy. And for the board, that's fine for us to say, and they would probably say, well, they would say that as good objectors. But the fact that there's a national ports policy supporting, and we are following what that policy is vitally important. So look, that's just another example on the planning process where this is extremely important. So I think by and large, it has been successful. If you really want to be pedantic and say, where did the policy fail? And I wouldn't call it a failure. The capacity study hasn't been completed at this point in time, but if we know it's going to be, and it was interfered because of Brexit and COVID. So what I think that is an important study, because we do need the capacity, because we have bigger port projects ourselves coming down the line. That capacity study will be a follow-on, if you like, from the ports policy. Because I suppose one of the problems with the port, it's a 20 ports policy, notwithstanding what I said about long-term assets under and all of that. It's still important that a review of that policy, an update review, is probably done in the next 1 to 2 years, given all now this change, which particularly with climate action and the European deal, and that's just another area where this ports policy has been hugely important, is under the 10T itself.
So, you obviously agree that it's timely now that the policy gets reviewed. So for any review of the policy now, what would you identify as, say, maybe the 3 biggest challenges the next port policy should be addressing?
Yeah, so I think the number one thing is I wouldn't change a whole lot, which is a good thing, I think, to start with. So it does not need to be majorly overhauled. I don't believe it does. I think it certainly we need the capacity study to inform the new policy, and I think the new policy then maybe should be more directed around that capacity study, and and then I think the funding of port infrastructure is very critical, because the issue with funding is that due to the long-term nature of the systems, it's very difficult to get just the commercial banks to fund, because they have kind of 10, 12, 13-year commercial loan windows maximum. So it does need more of that kind of national EIB style, ISIF involvement, where you look at these in the long term. And the other thing, the returns, from the financial CVAs, if you like, for port infrastructure, the returns are low single digits. If you're lucky, that's the norm for port assets. So, but the wider socioeconomic CVA is actually much more positive. So that's what I'm trying to say, that there's that funding gap for large projects, which are mainly the ports policy will identify in some of the capacity that's required, and all the ports and master plans at this stage of what would be a difficult process to, outline what's required in terms of future national port capacity, and then how that's going to be funded needs to be addressed. And I think the funding question needs to be broader than just saying the exchequer is not going to get involved, because then we run the risk, and it's not just here; it's in Dublin Port and Port Cork as well, that we actually won't have the port infrastructure in place that we need to meet future demand. So, part of that capacity study needs to do, I think, a pretty high-level demand analysis as well. Yes. What's the future demand for port infrastructure going to look like in terms of unitized, bulk tonnages, liquids, passengers? And from that, then, it can flow. This is how the capacity is going to be handled by the ports. And therefore, here's the investment, here's the infrastructure requirement, and then how is that going to be funded? And I suppose the other part of that capacity study as well, we need to look at the climate action requirements and the requirements coming from the EU as regards the greening of ports, if you like. So, for example, I think SEF2 is looking at having the core port system by 2025 have an OPS, that's onshore power supply for ships coal ironing. That is hugely expensive. For example, the Port of Rotterdam has I think, stated publicly that's going to cost them hundreds